Welcome to this installment of supplemental lectures provided by PNC's Concurrent Enrollment Program. My name is Alexandra Kindle, and I will share some information with you that comes out of my History 151 course at Purdue University North Central. Today we will discuss the market revolution that significantly changed the young nation economically, socially, and politically during the early to mid-19th century. This particular lecture has a little bit more reading content within the lecture, so I'll give you some time as we go through to do that reading. Just after the Revolution, 90% of Americans farmed. They made what they needed or traded and bartered with others. People were community-minded and independent. As we will see, as families moved away from subsistence activities, it modified women's roles, bringing them more directly into the public sphere of labor and the economy. Early Americans had common goals: survival. Feeding their families and maintaining cohesive communities meant surviving during good times and bad, doing it together. Because of these individual revolutions, mentioned on the screen, industry, agriculture, and transportation, people changed how they worked and how they thought about work. And this accumulative will lead to the topic of the market revolution. There were new opportunities and the number of farmers went down. I say that, but keep in mind that 65% of Americans still lived in the country on the eve of the Civil War. But because of the changes in work and the economy, people moved away from a predominantly subsistence or pre-industrial economy to making decisions within a market economy. The pre-industrial economy of the United States was established by the English colonists and continued into the American period, changing after the War of 1812. The war pushed Americans to stop relying on the British for goods. You will hear some of these terms mentioned on the slide throughout the lecture. This lecture does not go into great depth about the various revolutions, those of agriculture, industry, and transportation, but it is designed to help you think more critically about them and their consequences and how they come together as this market revolution. These early mills utilized water power to move pulleys to operate machines. There are still some existing mills maintained on living history farms, such as the one you see pictured here. With these mills, fewer people were needed to make cloth, but the machines were not so advanced that they would operate unattended, and each one of these machines would have required a person to stand in front of it and make sure that it operated correctly. This resulted in the consolidation of physical and human resources in the Northeast. In this image, factories, canals, and dormitories brought these resources into the service of factory owners. Very few people were willing to abandon their farms or their families just to go off to the mills to work. When whole families were enlisted, children and young girls worked in the mills, while fathers and older brothers farmed on factory lands. Mothers ran households and gardens as farm wives did traditionally. The Lowell system, of course, brought young girls to the factories, leaving their families behind. As you read about this in your text, keep an eye on the fact that these girls worked to help their families, and their families expected these young ladies to return to their communities. Factory owners provided dorm matrons to guarantee that the girls went to church and stayed out of trouble. American life had been, to this point, unmechanized. People ordered their lives with daily, weekly, and seasonal chores, based on natural rhythms of work and rest. But with factory work emerging, counting hours of work, not just tasks completed, became more important, and clockmakers responded by finding ways to make clocks cheaper. By the end of the market revolution, clocks were in mass production. At $1.50 per clock, most white Americans could afford one. By 1850, 3/4 of the white population owned some sort of timepiece. Factory owners started using these clocks to determine wages and efficiency. In essence, they were taking the natural rhythms out of workers' lives. By using river water and building dams and canals, factory owners also changed the local ecology. Fish species disappeared as they lost ways to their breeding grounds, and farmers lost access to water for home and farm use. Cities emerged where once there had been just rural areas. Just discussing the Industrial Revolution lets us see major changes in people's lives. As people traded hours for wages, they also lost other values and lifeways. Early in the 19th century, this only affected a few in the Northeast. Yet the country is changing, so these values would have started dissipating. These pre-industrial values would have been dissipating as the market revolution took hold in other places as well. As more and more people moved into cities, urban people needed more food. Farmers looked to grow more, feeding themselves and others in the United States and beyond. So it was necessary to have an agricultural revolution about the time as there was an industrial revolution. Like textile mills or clockmakers who unpacked the process of making goods, farmers had to look to more industrial-style techniques to mass-produce farm goods. And here you can see 3 major modes of doing that. During the 1820s and 1830s, Americans moved west in search of cheap, fertile soil. As they moved into prairie lands, old-style cast-iron plows were too weak to handle the work. John Lane and then John Deere set to work on steel plows to bust prairie sod that would be used to grow grains by farmers. As people moved west, people needed to move goods and stay in touch. All news came by word of mouth or in print, so transportation meant a lot to people personally and economically. Hauling goods over long distances was slow and difficult. Canals offered some easier options, connecting rivers to lakes or rivers. Not only could people use boats and water, but they were not bound to northerly or southerly routes. Roads and turnpikes continued to be built and maintained because canals froze in winter or failed in drought. Learning to level, grade, and integrate ditches also helped engineers build better canals and later railroads. Not only did canals suffer in extreme weather, they were expensive to build and maintain. Construction cost about $20,000 to $30,000 per mile. $20,000 to $30,000 per mile. Maintenance costs were additional. People also found roads unreliable depending on season, with mud, snow, or ice providing sometimes unsurmountable obstacles. New York City benefited greatly due to the connections created by the Erie Canal. People in cities such as Baltimore, the B in B&O, wanted to compete, and the railroad offered the city an advantage. There were 28 miles of track in 1830 and expanded to 30,000 miles by 1860. This is slow growth, but this is a beginning, and the railroad would prove before the Civil War to be a very important transportation mode, and after the Civil War there will be more more rail laid. Building railroads took experimentation and adaptation. Laying track, building cars, and funding the building of it all took new ideas. As you can see here, the first trains were just steam engines pulling wagons. Over time, men invented new trains to suit the American experience. And you can imagine the big triangle front, known as the cow catcher, was an important part. But there was a whole host of adaptations made to trains to help them make them work better in the United States. The ones you see pictured here worked well in small places like England, but not the vast open spaces of the United States. A lot happened in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. America changed so that by the 1840s, the North and South were becoming economically, socially, and politically different. The bifurcated nation would find it difficult to maintain its common interests and cooperate by the 1850s. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that this information will help you in your studies. We all hope to see you at PNC when you are done with your high school degree.